So welcome at the London Business School. My name is Ilias Papaioannou and I'm the academic co-director of the Wheeler Institute for Business and Development, which was set up something like 7 years ago with the very generous support of Tony and Maureen Wheeler, who you all know actually, because they are the founders of Lonely Planet, that have allowed us to see the beauties of Romania, of Greece, of Africa. So we're really thankful to Tony and Maureen for allowing us to set up an institute to promote research and teaching about the world's most cutting edge and I would say first order issues, and think how businesses can be an engine for development, not only in the rich club of nations, but also in the less privileged communities, both of industrial countries and also of emerging markets. As part of our work, and not only we organize and we sponsor research and teaching, but we try to bring business leaders, world leaders, I will say, in this environment, and try to mingle with our alumni, our great students, and our faculty. I know that many of you have attended events that we had with the Director General of the OECD, the Prime Minister of Greece and Serbia, and we are very, very pleased to have with us today Mircea Geoană, who is the Deputy Director General of NATO. He will engage in the discussion with my great friend and colleague, Florin Vasvari, from the accounting subject area. I will let Florin do the introduction to Mircea. Just 2 words about Florin. Florin has done first order and very important work in accounting. He serves as the head of the accounting subject area at the London Business School and also participates at our management board. He has perhaps, I would say, the most important book on private equity. So, Florin, please come, and thanks a lot for organizing this amazing event. Thank you all for being, also I would say, we had something like 1,000 registrations for online, so thank you all for logging in via Zoom. Thank you all.
It's my great pleasure to host Mircea Geoană today at London Business School for the first time. This has been quite an oversubscribed event, actually. So unfortunately, maybe because of the rain, people are behind. Usually, people always blame public transportation in London for being late. So it's my great pleasure to host Mircea for the first time at London Business School, where he will be sharing his views with our students and alumni. I wanted to give a short introduction to Mircea. He's quite a known person in Romania. I happen to be Romanian as well, as you can probably figure out. Mircea started his career in the early 90s in the foreign ministry in Romania, where he was a director and spokesman. Then after that, he became Romania's ambassador in Washington. So he was representing Romania in the United States. He came back in 2000. After 5 years as an ambassador in Washington, he came to become the foreign affairs minister. And shortly after that, 5 years of doing that, if I read correctly the bio, he ran for elections, he became a senator, and he had a lot of positions within the Romanian Senate. One of them, for a couple of years, he was actually the president of the Romanian Senate. And during that, he was also the president of the Organization for Security and Cooperation within Europe. And in 2019, he became the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. So he's joining us in his capacity as Deputy Secretary General of NATO. And hopefully he will be talking not just about the geopolitical situation, but also about some of the interesting economic pursuits that NATO is looking at right now with an innovation fund. Mircea, thanks for coming. Thank you. That's your seat over here. So the way we will structure the discussion for the first 30 minutes, I'll have a fire chat with Mircea, and then for the last 30 minutes, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So feel free to think of any questions that you might have. And let me just start with the beginning, Mircea. You became, in October 2019, the first Eastern European leader in NATO. And NATO is an organization that started in 1949, so 70 years later. The first Eastern European leader was appointed in the organization. The organization has 30 countries, and as of today, I don't know if you read the news, but very recently, today, in fact, the Turkish parliament or the Turkish government ratified Finland's entry in NATO. So, leaving aside some probably basic administrative issues, Finland technically is part of NATO from today. And so we'll have 31 countries. I wanted to first ask you about the process of selecting a Deputy Secretary General or a Secretary General of NATO, and what did you learn when you joined the organization back in 2019?
First, thank you so much for having me. If there's some cyber attack, let me know. I can handle that.
Working on it.
I love being with young leaders. And I love seeing, audiences that are comprising people from various cultures, various nations, various continents, because we have a world that we need to protect. So, what is not in the bio that Florin so graciously presented is that I lived half of my life in communist Romania. And I was trying to travel to the West, but those guys were not allowing us to travel in those days. So when the communists fell in Europe, the first thing I tried in, let's say, free Romania is to catch up with the lost time I had in my young years, your age, when I was trying to really see the world and decide on my own what is good for me, my country, my family, and everything else. And my first university was the Polytechnical University of Bucharest, so I'm an engineer by training. But because I'm very curious of finding new things, then I went after a few years to go to the law school. And then I went to the École Nationale d'Administration in Paris, which is one of the best public administration schools in 1991, 1992. And then I went to have a PhD in economics, and then I went to Harvard with the World Bank group. So if responding to the question is the fact, I didn't have a clue that I will end here. But even in difficult times, in the dark times of communism, or in the period when you're young and there are so many avenues and you know which way to go, I'm telling you as a personal experience and sharing with you, my young friends, trust yourselves, invest in yourself. Not only go through formal education, but always be curious. Be vividly, intellectually curious. And opportunities will come. So, how I got hired, I don't know. And by the way, I also have a personal news. Can I say it? My colleagues from NATO, can I say the fact that Secretary General asked me to stay more? Okay. So not even that I was hired in 2019, but I was offered a prolongation of my term for 1 year. And today, our Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, former Prime Minister of Norway, fantastic leader. He asked me to stay for 1 more year, so I will be having, almost probably a 5-year term. Now, on a more serious note, what I think the organization wanted is, number one, to send the signal to the new members of NATO who have joined this alliance after the fall of communism, Romania included, that we are grown-ups. That this idea that you're provincial and there is an asymmetry of political power, economic power between West and East, and that's true in Europe, that's also true around the world, is symbolically, in a way, addressed by my appointment. And I believe this is something that is an encouragement for smaller countries. Countries that are still finding their way. Countries are not as big, influential, or rich. That there's always a way if you really believe in yourselves and in your country and in your destiny. So what I've learned in NATO, of course, I've been doing politics. I'm a professional politician and a former diplomat. But what I learned in NATO is number one, how a formidable institution really works. I swear to God, I've been in politics, I've been in OSCE, EU, UN many times. I've never seen a leaner, more effective organization like NATO. Never before. We started a young professional program at NATO 2 years ago, and we had, for the 30 positions that we offered, 1,400 applicants for one position. People want to come. Why? Because we are a sort of a universe of things. Political, civilian, technology, military, security, cyber, resilience, space, hybrid. We deal with security in the broadest sense of the terms. And we are doing directly or indirectly with economic security and economic resilience. And as we are now seeing the world reshaping itself in multiple ways, I want to say that what I'm learning from NATO, that in order to thrive, you have to always innovate. Never stay on your laurels. You might be the brightest and the best at this point in time. But tomorrow, somebody, if you don't invest in yourself and don't innovate, somebody would outcompete you. And always the followers, the imitators, will never be more successful than the original innovators. So what I learned in NATO, I also chair the innovation board in NATO. I'm here in London because we established at Imperial College a first of its kind Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, Diana, which is an ecosystem of 100 test centers, accelerators for startups. So if you guys have a bright idea about dual use technologies, you can use our test centers and accelerators on AI, on quantum, on biotech, on name it. And also, we'll be speaking about this later probably, Florine, we are also working with an innovation fund of NATO, which is the first venture capital multinational sovereign fund of its sort. Sounds a little bit bipolar. It is not. So we're helping young entrepreneurs to test their ideas for free in our test centers, and also put a little bit of seed money, trusted capital for them to cross the valley of death and then go to the real markets. And I want you guys, when you start a business with NATO or not, I want NATO unicorns to be successful. But I also want you to stay with as much equity in your pockets before you are maturing your business. So what I learned in NATO, in a nutshell, is that you need high-level professionalism. You need to innovate every single day. And the third lesson is that the world is exceptionally convoluted and dangerous. I never believed that we'll have war again in Europe, even if we knew that the war would start. I never believed I would see such huge technological revolution. I now never thought that we see so much connection between economics and security and democracy and global competition like I'm seeing here. So I think I'm a lucky guy. But I also had difficult moments in my life. I lost elections. I was really not always being a big shot. So also learn from your mistakes and also try to find energy to move forward. So yeah, I'm enjoying every single second of my job on NATO, and I encourage you to look at NATO with different eyes. And I hope today I will make you look and reconsider what you eventually think about NATO.
Thank you so much. So maybe I'll just jump straight in, because probably the question that is sitting on everybody's minds is the conflict in Europe. And this is the first conflict of its kind since the Second World War, at this magnitude at least. So on February 24th last year, I'm sure all of you are aware of that, Russia invaded Ukraine, shocking the entire continent and probably the world. And as you said, the military buildup was kind of there for a couple of months already. I wanted to start by asking you if this conflict was preventable. What could we have done, maybe now with the benefit of hindsight, to prevent this? How could we have prepared better as a continent? And NATO in particular, if you want to comment on that.
That's a good question, but I'm not a great fan of counterfactual history.
Yeah, sure.
What if, that's also in life.
Yeah.
I know one thing, that this propaganda coming from Russia, that NATO is encircling Russia and is an expansionist NATO, is absolutely, it's a BS. I know my country, how I lobbied for my country to join NATO. Nobody gave us a chance that we'll eventually join NATO and European Union, because they were basically, for the ones coming from Europe, you know that in fact enlargements of NATO were precursors to EU enlargement. In Washington, there was a big hesitation after the collapse of the Soviet Union, what to do with Russia. And there was an idea, a current of ideas, to do something similar to what America has done with Germany and Japan, defeated in the Second World War. Or with South Korea, after the Korean War. And there was, but also Russia was not defeated militarily. It was a system that imploded. A system that was not able to sustain development and growth and just collapsed. So it was not a defeated nation like Germany and Japan. It was just a country that lost the competition for ideas of how to organize societies. And then slowly our lobby convinced the US that enlargement is good. There's absolutely nothing to do against Russia. And if you have a little bit of geography, a generic map of the world, how in the world can you encircle a country that has 11 time zones? How can you encircle something like, even with Finland joining, which is, 1,300 kilometers, so NATO is not about anything aggressive when it comes to this. No. We also made mistakes over time. So this is not the idea that we are just perfect, but I'm saying that in nature, we are a defensive alliance, a political alliance, and our obligation is to keep peace in Europe for the 1 billion people living in NATO countries, 1 billion. NATO countries have more than 50% of global GDP. We have the best universities in the world. We have the best researchers in the world. And what I think the real competition is for how to organize this better. So, was it this preventable? Looking now in retrospect, I think that the imperialistic impulse in Russia has never gone away. So this kind of grabbing land is something that probably is part of the culture of a great empire. And also something that we are very much adamant against is the idea that you have spheres of influence. A nation like Ukraine, or the Republic of Moldova, or Georgia, or Romania, or Poland, or the Baltic countries, because they are in so-called sphere of influence of Russia, they cannot decide independently, as a sovereign nation, as a democratic nation, where I want to go. I want to be an ally with the UK and the US, that's my job. I want to be an ally with Russia or Iran or North Korea, it's also your job. It's not myself to tell you where to go. But somebody to tell me where not to go, this is something we'll never accept. We'll never ever accept. That someone can tell me as a nation, as a free nation, what kind of foreign policy, what kind of place under the sun I want to have, and what kind of system of alliances I want to be part of. So, Ukraine. Ukraine is a big country. 40 million plus population, a geography which is quite significant, and a nation that has been under Russian attack since 2014. Crimea was annexed illegally. Eastern part of the Donbass, where the war is now raging on, was occupied in 2014. And you know why? And Ukraine before 2015, they were basically quite Russia-leaning. Quite Russia-leaning. You know what triggered the Maidan protest of 2014-15? You remember the big square full of people young like you? Because the leadership of Ukraine at that time wanted to backpedal from the free trade agreements that Ukraine was establishing with the European Union. And the leadership of Ukraine, under Russian pressure, said, okay, we don't want to go towards Europe. Economically, commercially, not strategically or militarily. And the youth of Ukraine started a big protest against the fact that Russia was imposing something different, because they know that with Europe is democracy and prosperity, with Russia is dictatorship and poverty. So the right of Ukrainians to choose. And then when they changed the constitution in 2015 and say, we want to be members of NATO and European Union, Ukraine, that's their sovereign decision. It's not my decision in NATO. But if a country wants to join, like Finland, and hopefully soon Sweden, or Romania, or Poland before, it's my job as a country where I want to belong to. So what happened since 2014? It was, so in terms of public opinion, in the early 2010, I think 80% of Ukrainians, as a public opinion, believe that Russia is the best friend of Ukraine. Today, 95% of Ukrainians believe that Russia is an existential threat to Ukraine. So this is in fact what this war is all about. And I do believe that, we knew the war is coming, because you can imagine we have good intelligence. We knew in advance. We tried up to the last minute to prevent Mr. Putin from going over the brink. We really tried up to the last moment. All of us, our leaders, us in NATO, we tried to say, don't do that. It's a formidable mistake if you do that. But I think he started to believe his own propaganda about the decadent West, that they're disunited, that we are weak, that Ukraine is weak, that Ukraine is no nation, in fact. It's an appendix of Russia. And they got it wrong. They got it wrong. Ukraine is a nation that is fortified in bravery. The West is united. We are helping Ukraine. Not only NATO countries helping Ukraine, countries from all over the world are helping Ukraine. And for the ones who are coming from overseas, and that you see as a European conflict, and people ask, and young people ask from India and from Asia and from Middle East and from Latin America, and I think there are people from all over the world in this room.
Indeed, yeah.
So why don't you bother, you the West, when we have conflicts in our part of the world? Why it's sort of a double standard? Because in Europe is important, and because in my region is not important? We can debate over that. I tell you one thing, my young friends from all over the world. The way in which the Ukraine crisis, war, will end, will have global implications. Because this will, in a way, tell the rest of the world if force, brute force, can replace the rule of law. What happens today in Europe could happen tomorrow in Asia. So in a way, this is a litmus test on independence, sovereignty, and the UN Charter. But also Russia is part of.
Yeah.
So we'll have questions in a second. So what I'm just trying to tell you that even if you see that we're obsessed with European affairs, in fact, this is shaping the world for many decades to come. And that's why we believe it's important for Ukraine to be supported, to win this war, because it's about a war for independence and sovereignty. And this is something important for the rest of the world.
So what were Russia's objectives back in February 2022? And maybe how do you think those objectives might have changed by now?
I think the strategic objectives of the Kremlin are the same.
They haven't changed.
They haven't changed. Strategically, they would like not to see Ukraine joining the West.
Mm-hmm.
What's the real strength of Russia to stop Ukraine from going towards the West? That's a different question, and that's why the struggle on the battlefield. They believe that it would conquer Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, in 2-3 days. You know, speaking of young heroes, it was a young boy, a teenager from Ukraine, with a drone, a civilian drone, a commercial drone that you buy from the shelf, that was basically giving to the Ukrainian military information about the advance of the Russian tanks towards Kiev. You know that there is an Ukrainian ballerina from the state opera that has replaced the dancing shoes with body armor, and she's fighting now bravely on the front. So yeah, he miscalculated both the capacity of Ukraine to resist and our capacity to support Ukraine.
So how did the conflict change NATO? I mean, you mentioned, obviously we know about Sweden and Finland trying to, I mean, Finland is already in, but also in terms of maybe military strategy, thinking about a conflict, and even technology, right? There's a lot of innovation, not just in the battlefield.
I mentioned at the beginning that for any person, any organization, any nation, innovation and permanent adaptation to a changing environment are key for your success. And NATO was founded in 1949, and I think we have embedded in our genes someplace and passed from generation to generation, from 12 members originally to 31 or 32 tomorrow. A gene of permanent adaptation to a changing world. So this war in Ukraine, but also the fact that the definition of security is becoming so much broader than before. It's not only about defense. It's not about Ministry of Defense. It's not about tanks and fighter jets and whatever you have, or tanks in the case of Ukraine. It's about security in a much broader definition. So NATO is working on energy security. We are working on the security of undersea critical infrastructure like cables for data or pipelines. We are working for cyber. We are working on hybrid. We are working on things coming from space, on biotech, on human enhancement, on quantum technologies. And as I mentioned, as a chair of the innovation board in NATO, I see how every innovation is in a ubiquitous way dual use. So the same AI and quantum can be used for huge progress for human mankind, huge progress. Curing disease, fighting climate change, making our lives better. But the same thing, in the same product, you also have the seeds of destruction. So yes, in NATO we are always adapting, and the fact that security is now, I think, the dominant topic, economic security, social security, military security, democratic security, are at the forefront, makes also NATO probably more relevant than ever. I would say that today NATO is more relevant, or as relevant as at the inception during the Cold War. And this is why so many nations want to join NATO. And also we have more than close to 40 nations that are partners of NATO. We have a close partnership with the European Union, a close partnership with the UN. We are training UN peacekeepers in Africa because we are simply the best in terms of standards of security. And that's why NATO is so relevant, because we have this adaptation, this innovation gene in everything we do. And that's why I think NATO is so relevant and and sometimes feared.
Yeah, it's obviously difficult to see the future, but you know, what is your assessment of how this conflict will end and when potentially? And maybe, I don't know if you can comment on the relationship that you see in the long term between Ukraine and Europe, and Ukraine and NATO as well.
You know, if you read the history books, and we all do, all conflicts and wars have an end. And it's always a political settlement of sorts. But for that, you need two to tango. And as I mentioned, Russia maintains its maximalistic interest in subjugating Ukraine government in Kiev and keep them in the Russian orbit and sphere of influence. So that's maximalistic. On the other side, for the good reasons, Ukrainians are trying to liberate their lands. And that's again, so politically we don't see the conditions yet for a settlement. Secondly, wars by definition are unpredictable and not predictable. That's why we believe that by helping Ukraine now, in fact, we make the conditions for peace to come sooner rather than later. Sounds counterintuitive, but it is not. Because the only way for this war to stop is for Mr. Putin and Moscow to change the calculus about the end result and the cost-benefit analysis. You're a business school. The cost-benefit analysis, we believe, is starting to look very, very bleak for Mr. Putin. Close to 200,000 young Russian military dead or wounded. An economy that suffers from sanctions. Millions of young Russians fleeing the country. Western companies leaving the country. That's something that is costly. And if Ukraine, with more equipment, with more training, with the same bravery, will be able to be even more successful in the battlefield, we hope that by helping Ukraine now, in fact, will be bringing peace sooner. Will this work? We'll see. But I know one thing, that Ukraine's, and I've never seen so much bravery and so much heroism, so much ingenuity like our Ukrainian friends in fighting this war. Civil society, NGOs, small businesses, everyone, women, there to defend their country and their freedom and their independence. That's something that I believe is also a source of inspiration in talking about what government, business, civil society can be doing together. But unfortunately, in all honesty to all of you, we do not see chances for a resolution of this conflict peacefully anytime soon. So we have to we have to stay the course and be resilient also in this direction.
And will Ukraine engage closer to Europe and NATO, or it's hard
As I
to
mentioned,
predict?
is a sovereign right, like Finland has decided to join NATO. You know, Finland has been a neutral country from the Second World War. And Sweden has been a neutral country from 1812.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So basically, the war of Russia against Ukraine created a reflex of self-protection from these countries, and they want to join NATO. And as a Romanian and as a leader of this alliance, what we have said that open door policy, so any nation in Europe that is ready and willing and accepted by us to join, so we say to Ukraine the same thing. I'm very happy the European Union has given candidate status to Ukraine and also to the Republic of Moldova and also Georgia across the Black Sea. They are also aspiring to become a candidate. So if these countries want to be part of us, and of course, we have to talk about NATO and Ukraine a lot, but probably after the war would end, then we can also think of something even more structured. But I'm very, very heartened as a Romanian and as a NATO leader to see the European Union moving forward with Ukraine. Because in fact, NATO and EU, we are two sides of the same coin. Different organizations, but nonetheless, same principles. More and more overlap of membership. And that's why we believe that Ukraine and Moldova and everyone, they should choose freely where they want to go. And if they want to go towards us, and if they are ready and we are ready, we'll welcome them. There's absolutely no question about it.
You mentioned Moldova. Is there a risk that the conflict will spread over there? Or how do you see Moldova's place, given its location between Ukraine and Romania?
You know, the Republic of Moldova is a country that is, through the current leadership of the Republic of Moldova, President Maia Sandu, the government she has, you know, I'm an old hand in politics. I think they're just nothing short of extraordinary leaders. And they struggle because the country is not that big. The military it's a neutral country by constitution. The military of Moldova is relatively small. Mm-hmm. And also there are many forces inside the Republic of Moldova that are pro-Russian, and also they have lots of proxies that Russia can use against them. So what now Russia is trying to do, because they don't have the military power to go there, because they would need to occupy Odessa, go all the way to Transnistria, they don't have that power. They are basically trying to destabilize Moldova from within and foment a so-called civic unrest against the pro-Western government in Moldova. So we're trying to help Moldova. Moldova is also a joint partner of NATO and European Union. I will be visiting Chișinău in the next few days. And I'm very happy that the European Political Community Summit will be held in Chișinău at the beginning of June. So in a way, also in a much smaller scale, also the Republic of Moldova is an example of what a country squeezed between bigger players and with a societal fragmentation will look like. And I think Moldovans, all of them, ethnic Romanians, ethnic Russians, Ukrainians, or Gagauz, they have a small population of Turkish population Christianized. I think all of them deserve a chance to live better. And let me tell you something also from my experience in politics and geopolitics. Being in a gray zone geopolitically around the world is the most dangerous spot you can be. And for many countries, including for the Republic of Moldova, they believe that being somehow in between was in a way more protection than choosing sides. No, not true. So I believe that if Moldova, if Ukraine, if Georgia, if the Western Balkan countries want to join NATO or the European Union, and they are ready for that, I think we should welcome them. I'm not in the position to deny anyone around the world the free choice to choose whatever arrangements, whatever future they want to have.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time, and given that we are in a business school, let me ask one last question before we open it to the audience, and that would be about your fund. So in March last year, NATO decided to launch the Innovation Fund, a €1 billion innovation fund to invest in dual-use technologies. And when I read about the news, my mind drifted to DARPA in the United States, a very successful organization, which is part of the security establishment in the US that invented the internet, stealth technology, and GPS and many other innovations.
And Siri.
The Siri that has been very successful, and all that military technology spilled over in the commercial use, and we all use it today, and it changed our lives. So going back to this, how do you see this €1 billion fund in Europe investing? What is the strategy, and how would you define success for this fund, let's say many years down the road? And is it a way of maybe replicating the model in the US?
In the 60s and 70s, most of the research for new technologies were driven by governments and many times by the military industrial complex. Okay? Today, 90% of the technology we use in defense and security in NATO countries are coming from the private sector. So it's gone in the total opposite direction. And I believe this is good, because thus we can really embrace the innovation ecosystem, the triple helix of government, private sector, and academia, in order to spur progress and also have better technologies for what they call dual-use technologies that can be used for civilian and military purposes. So, and big organizations and big governments are sometimes relatively slow in adapting and incorporating new technologies. So our decision was twofold: to get out from our comfort zone and change dramatically by innovating the way in which NATO can really play a role in this innovation ecosystem. So I want you to see, Diana, the 100 test centers, accelerators for startups that are offered in Europe, but also in North America. The one center is in London, and the other one is in Canada for North America. And we have, to give you the example, the US government has given us an MIT lab to be part of this. My home country of Romania and my alma mater, the Political University of Bucharest, is giving an AI center to this thing. So you have an idea, you can choose from Diana wherever you want to test your idea and then improve it. And then the innovation fund comes in. And when we started with this idea, many people said, what are you doing? This is venture capital. What is NATO doing in this? I said, no. We have to help the young entrepreneurs, the startups. And testing your ideas in Diana and having a little bit of seed money, trusted capital from NATO will help many of these startups to go across the difficult period when you struggle with the prototype and putting your product to the market. And also we want to do something else, to be honest. I would like to leave you as much money in your pockets as equity as possible. Because sometimes in order to keep your idea and your business, your startup alive, you sell equity from your thing just to have money to make it move on. So I think it's nothing short of formidable. Should the US emulate from us? No. because the depth of the venture capital market in America and also in London is immense. What I want to have, I have the smaller nations in Europe, in NATO. My country, Romania, the smaller countries, the ones that don't have the same huge universities like here, don't have the same financial depth. Sometimes venture capital markets are relatively, shallow. So in a way, what I'm also doing, I'm helping the entire NATO ecosystem to thrive through the Innovation Fund and Diana, and I'm exceptionally proud that we are able to innovate in this thing because this is cutting edge. And if you have ideas for dual-use technologies, reach out to my colleagues that have this center at the Imperial College, is in the other side of the city, and you can find more information. And who knows, from London Business School, we have some smart ideas, and we can make you young, rich, and famous.
That's one of our objectives in the business school.
That's why I love being here.
So let's open it up for questions.
I think there was the lady there was starting from, and then it's yours.
Do we have a microphone going around? Yeah?
Good morning. My name is Andrea Palagis, and I'm a fellow Romanian as well. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, but please feel free to answer the one where you feel is most interesting. The first one is rather about...
Maybe just ask only one so that everybody has an opportunity.
1.5.
Well, I wanted to ask, considering your long career and as more as advice for somebody starting out, what do you think is the biggest mistake of your career? And if you could go back, would you change it, or do you think that you've learned a lot from it?
The biggest.
My biggest mistake is also my biggest achievement when I got into politics. Really. Because as many of you, I didn't have a clue about politics. I was a young professional, pretty good at my job. I was the youngest ambassador of Romania ever. At 37, I was going as ambassador to Washington, which is the top of the thing. I was so good at what I did, really good. And I know that you also are and will be top in your careers. And then I decided to change gears and get into politics, and it was tough. And sometimes only your professional skills are not good enough for the more complex world of politics. So if you ask my family and my wife, they say the biggest mistake was when I joined politics. I also say it was also the luckiest of my decisions because I understood what it would mean through leadership to change things on a much bigger scale. So that was my mistake. My mistake, but also my luck in a way. Probably would have been, I was offered a position after I finished the foreign minister job to be vice president of the EBRD in London. Jean Lemierre, who's now the chair of BNP Paribas, offered me the job. He was the president. And I went to my wife, kids were young, I said, wow, great, we go to London, great schools, good pay. And from Romania, those days, it was huge. I don't know if destiny or the devil or something, a combination, told me, no. So yeah, a big mistake is getting into politics. The luckiest move I had is having chosen politics as a professional for the second part of my life.
Thank
I hope you get into politics as well.
Where shall we pick? Shall we
It's you.
balance it?
It's you. It's you. It's you.
So in the back in red, gentleman in red. Thank you. We'll bring you one.
There's one there.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Speak about the rule of law and NATO being an offensive alliance. I think Napoleon said to understand someone, you need to know what the world looked like when they were 20. When a lot of us were 20, NATO countries were in Iraq without a second UN resolution, ignoring UN weapons inspectors' advice. I think in Libya, there was a UN resolution for a no-fly zone, and some people felt that actually there was a bit of mission creep there. Let's say with Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom and America continue to support Saudi despite what happened with Khashoggi and war crimes. And some people feel that 2% of GDP isn't being spent by NATO countries towards the alliance. So it seems there's a tension between faith in international institutions and other priorities, and a tension between what some NATO countries say and what they do. What can you do and what are you doing as Deputy Secretary General to actually make sure that NATO countries are consistent and actually have moral authority for the rest of the century?
No, thank you for the question, and that's a absolutely valid question. I mentioned that we have, as an organization, a gene of adaptation to a changing world. I also think we have a capacity to learn from our own mistakes. We had mistakes. We also had mistakes. You didn't mention the last part of withdrawal from Afghanistan. I have colleagues in NATO that were really having psychological problems because they served there and they felt so desperate in leaving the young women, the young girls, and so many Afghans that put their faith in us alone. So that's correct. But if you look at the world today, you see that the need for a strong security organization like NATO has never been more important than now. And I think learning from the mistakes and coming back to your original values, this is something I strongly believe. The values in the UN Charter, the values in the Washington Treaty of NATO, the values in the European Constitution that I signed, I have it at home. It was then turned down by referenda in France and the Netherlands. They're all coming from a conversation that Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the American president, had in Canada, off the coast of Canada, I think in 1941, the beginning of the Second World War. And the war was basically, and don't say in a moment like this, but a similar dramatic moment of change. And these two leaders drafted what we call, and I encourage you to read, the Atlantic Charter. They speak of economic freedom to the world. They speak of freedom from fear, the freedom to choose your own destiny as a nation, the freedom of trade, the freedom of sea navigation. And these were the foundations of the UN Charter, of the World Bank, of the IMF, of NATO, of the European Union, everything we have as norms. In the Washington Treaty, my treaty as NATO, we have democracy, rule of law, and values that we have to always come back. So when you lose a little bit your focus and you also make mistakes, you have the capacity to learn from those mistakes and make sure that you go back to the origins of your values and your principles. And that's true for every human being. We make mistakes. The question is, can you recover from mistakes? Can you learn from these things? And speaking of my young Romanian friend there, can you also get even stronger after a defeat or after a failure? And that's a test of leadership and moral strength. And I think we are a very strong alliance. also from this perspective. So thank you for asking the tough question, because that's true.
We'll switch to this side. Gentleman over here.
I think your colleagues with the mic should go to the athletics department, because they make so much
On
exercise.
purpose, I switched
Yeah, okay.
sides too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm Marco. I'm a student in the MBA program here at LBS. Thank you so much for the insights. I was wondering, if Russia would decide tomorrow to end the war for whatever reason, what would be, from your point of view, the right reaction of Western countries? Would the sanctions just be lifted, or are there any kind of like punishment payments, or what is the right reaction of Western countries?
Again, counterintuitive history, backwards or forwards, is not my strong point. But I can say the war can stop the very second when Mr. Putin decides to stop the war will start or stop. And then, like after every war, there is a settlement, a peace that has some conditions. And we have multiple examples in history how peace was crafted and how durable those peace accords were. So I know one thing, that war crimes that are committed in Ukraine cannot go unpunished, even for the sake of, they cannot go. Because the precedent for other places will be just an incitement for impunity. I know, damages for the destruction that Russia has. How can you go in the middle of winter in Ukraine and to target civilian things and energy grids just to keep people freezing with no water, civilians? What's that? It has to be a price to be paid for that too. So I'm not getting into what would be, because it's not us, NATO, it'll be Ukraine negotiating the deal and Russia negotiating the deal, and of course the international community watching. But I would say that Russia has the decision in its hands. They want to stop the war, they can stop it any second, and then of course there will be a conversation about the conditions of such a settlement, including guarantees that Russia will not use this so-called peace talks just as a trick to regroup, to replenish, and attack again. Because to be honest, we've seen that with Russia before. So yeah, it's in their hands, and I think we have to respond positively to such an initiative, but with certain conditions.
We'll go back to the left here. Okay, good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about, because the conflict in Ukraine has demonstrated that NATO needs munitions, needs the industrial capacity to build arms. And it's easy to maintain this momentum right now, the spending under the threat of war that's going on in Ukraine. But how do you see it over the next 10 years or so? Can NATO maintain that capacity, or once in one or the other shape, the conflict goes away, this goes away as well?
This relates to the question of 2% that our colleague up front has asked. So let's be honest. Us in Europe, for 30 years, after the fall of communism, we have been collecting the peace dividend. There was no risk. America was protecting all of us. NATO was protecting all of us. There was no problem from a security perspective. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in a situation the world is damn dangerous. Not only Europe, but everywhere around the world, there is danger. And speaking of NATO, we are quick in learning lessons. And what we do now, we are revisiting all our defense planning, all our innovation policy, all our multi-domain operations, land, sea, air, cyberspace, and space. We are going through the most radical transformation of military thinking in this alliance in decades. And what nations learn from this thing, NATO is organization, is that we have to make sure that we have the industrial capacity to produce the kind of stocks and ammunitions that we need. So I'm a politician. I also would love to spend as much as I can on education, healthcare, infrastructures, social benefits. Of course we need that. But also we have to know that security comes with a cost, and there is a price tag to security. And we are learning this as we speak. Also, NATO is good because we have economy of scale. And we are now speaking of interoperability, but also interchangeability. So NATO is also the gold standard when it comes to not only how much you produce and you manufacture, but how to do it cost effective and to be usable in many other directions. So I'm sorry to say, but we have to invest more in our defense and security because just the world is too dangerous for us. And in Europe mainly, I think this is a wake-up call. Our German friends, I think, they call it Zeitenwende, what they call a sort of a strategic awakening, the new dawn or something, in translated roughly into English. And the same thing happened in Japan. They decided to spend 2% of GDP for defense after decades of pacifistic policy and constitution. When the world is dangerous, you have to also be stronger in terms of defense and security. That's a fact of life.
So the defense industry will be reborn in Europe.
And I also hope that some of the restrictions that some of the investors have when it comes to investing in defense to be gradually lifted or reanalyzed. Because, you know, when I spoke about security, I speak about economic security, about resilience, about cyber, things that are also affecting our economic activity and our social life. So I hope that some of the misperceptions about the defense industry and technology with dual use will be somehow modified in this conversation about the way forward. Yeah. So I hope we'll have stronger ecosystems for dual use technologies in Europe.
The very back, tall hand, has an advantage over.
Hi, hello. My name is Hattie. I'm Palestinian MBA here, and I just had a question about some of the comments you made. So you said the overarching purpose of NATO is European security, but a lot of people might ask, at what point is that achieved? And if you look at NATO, it's got a lot of extra European partnerships with places such as Azerbaijan, Pakistan, seeking it with India, Mongolia. And you made a comment about Russia having 11 time zones. And if you kind of draw a line of best fit around the partnerships that NATO has globally, does a pretty good job of wrapping around Russia and China. So my question is, when does it all stop?
My answer to your valid question is that security nowadays, because of technology mainly, has a geographical aspect. And we have done a superb job for 75 years in NATO to have peace for NATO allies. That's the mission of NATO. Article 5 is one for all for one, one for all. So we secured peace and security for our members because that's the job of this organization. We are a Euro-Atlantic organization with the purpose to defend our allies. Full stop. 1 billion people. But some of the risks to our security are non-geographical. Some of the concerns of climate change are not only in Europe, they're all over the world. So when we have so many partnerships around the world, it's not the idea to encircle anyone, but to learn from the others and also listen to the others. I also run partnerships on behalf of our Secretary General, other than innovation and cyber. And I have to say that when we engage, I don't know, you mentioned a few countries, being a partner to NATO doesn't mean that you're a member of NATO or you share NATO's interests. A little bit different when it comes to Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the others. But others are countries that are sometimes ambivalent. Some of our partners abstained at the UN General Assembly when it comes to condemning Russia's invasion. We're trying to help Mauritania, which is a key country in the Sahel. But we are not pushing any partner to come towards our way. We are just respectful, and we learn from each other. So there's no size fits all. We have partners. I hope to have Ghana as our first sub-Saharan partner in the near future. Why they came to us? Not because they want to join NATO, just because they know they are so good in terms of national security and institution building, and they are concerned about the risk of spillover of terrorists from the Sahel to the Gulf of Guinea. You know that the Gulf of Guinea is the hottest place of piracy in the world. They moved from the Gulf of Aden on the other side to the other side of Africa. We have one partner in Latin America, which is Colombia. And Colombia is very concerned, and they're right to be concerned about the fact that there is so much narco-trafficking money channeled all the way to Africa and funding terrorist organizations. So security is interlinked, that's what I say. And you don't need to have a partner just to have them be NATO-ized in a way, but for you to learn and share information about our shared security concerns. So we are very respectful of our partners. And we are pushing no one against their own limit when it comes to dealing with us. So we're very, very, very tailored in our partnerships.
The far end on the left. Yeah.
Hi there, Sam Benny, Head of Innovation at TechNation. My question is around innovation, as you mentioned. That 90% of the supply chain comes from the private sector. And decentralizing that historically, would that increase potential of sabotage into that system? And if yes, how do you plan to manage that?
There is a huge competition for intellectual property. And the global competition for, let me put it in a blunt way, for technological supremacy, if you want, has many aspects to it. Some of them are legitimate. You invest, you have great universities, you put money, perfectly fine. But there's some subversive ways, espionage, intellectual property theft, alternative pathways. So you buy a semi-broke company that tried the new technology in 2019 and they didn't succeed. You just buy that almost for nothing, and you try to have an alternative pathway to the leading technology of today just by quantum technology will be making use of the trove of data that is deposited around the world and encrypted. And through quantum, they will be decrypted. So you can also have a history of research and innovation from almost everywhere. So that's a very complicated thing. So when I mentioned in the Innovation Fund question from Florin about trusted capital, I think this is an important issue. You have lots of nice guys with a good British accent that show up representing, I don't know what kind of a firm, and in fact, there's someone else behind that. So we have to be also careful in protecting our intellectual wealth. And that's something that I believe we need to do together.
Last question over here, the gentleman here. Sorry about, you're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Sanchit Gupta, an MBA student at LBS as well. I have a two-part question. Number one, is the utopian state of eternal world peace almost counterproductive for an organization such as the NATO? For any organization, long-term vision is extremely important, and so is it for a leader. What does that look like for NATO?
I would love to live in paradise. I'm afraid being a politician, I don't qualify. So the world is a tough place to be. And because we have here a Greek friend. We speak a lot about the Thucydides trap, the famous ancient Greek competition for supremacy between Sparta and Athens. And also these great books that are recently written in Harvard and other places on how to avoid the Thucydides trap. And that's basically the eternal challenge and competition for global or regional supremacy. It's part of human nature. It's part of nations. We compete. We try to be better. We try to be smarter. We try to be more agile. We try to be more innovative, okay? Unfortunately, in times of big transformation of world affairs, when the balance of power, when equilibriums are broken, the risk of also a violent confrontation or less of a utopian, peaceful world are becoming a reality. So the business of NATO is in fact to avoid war, thus keeping peace. And the fact that we are the most successful alliance in human history. Why people say of NATO that we are the most successful alliance in history? Also because we were able for 75 years, which is a long period of history, to maintain peace, at least for us. So, sorry to say, my young friend, competition is going to intensify. We'll do our utmost to make sure that we don't have a new Cold War between us or China or whoever. It's not our interest. We want a safer place. We want a place where there are rules. We want a place where nuclear deterrence does operate and function. We want to be the foundation of peace and security, and everything else can be built upon. This great school, your life, my career, because without peace and security, there's nothing you can build upon. Not a family, not a career, nothing. So we're the foundation of world peace and security. And that's why NATO is so important, even for the ones who don't like that much. We are an element of predictability in the world. We are a portion of global stability in the world. And that's why our partnerships are so important. And that's why we believe we are more relevant than ever. And personally, never give up on your ideals. When we're young, we tend to be more idealistic and more romantic about life. And as you grow older, you tend to become more cynical and in a way uglier and older. Keep that freshness of your young years in yourself as your driving engine for anything that will happen to you in your life. Keep that freshness of the well of your moral values that I see animating you, my young friend. And when you have a difficult moment in life, there will be difficult moments in life, go back to that thing that really makes you kick and tick as a human being. And these things could be different for each of us. I'm not preaching to have one moral compass that fits all. No. Always go back to who you are, what really makes you think you can make a difference in the world. Have a happier life, a healthier life, and hopefully giving something back to society, if you can. And being at a business school, your business is to really increase profitability and productivity and make business go better. But there's always something more than immediate profit and immediate success. That's what leaders do. And this is why I'm so happy to be with young leaders like yourself, my dear friends, today. And I hope that you'll be inviting me for more if I didn't bore you too much today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Geoană, for joining us today and for your time and insights. And hopefully, on this high note, we'll end our conversation here. But I wanted to just say a couple of words about the Wheeler Institute that hosted us today. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to submit some additional questions and check the Wheeler Institute website for additional events. I wanted to say that on the 20th of April, we will have another guest. We'll have Christos Stylianides, hopefully I pronounced this correctly, who is the Minister of Climate Crisis and Civil Affairs, Civil Protection in Greece. He will be discussing with one of my colleagues, Yanis, in strategy about those issues. And the last thing that I wanted to say is to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully we all learned something here, and we look forward to a brighter future. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.